On September the 19th, 2021, the remains of a young woman were found, and this gruesome discovery would not only end, but start a brand new manhunt. Gabby Petito had been missing for nearly a month after setting off on what was supposed to be an amazing trip with her boyfriend, Brian Laundrie. But this trip was to set off a chain of events that many could have never seen coming. This is a case of twists and turns, lies and deception, an attempted family cover-up to protect their spouse, and ultimately, some might still feel a case where justice has not truly been served. This is the murder of Gabby Petito.
So in this case, there are themes of domestic violence. And what we want to say before we start is if you or anyone you know are going through anything similar to this, we will link some resources in the description of this video. With all of these cases, we try and handle them as sensitively as we can, paying respects to both the victim, their friends, and also their family. And we will always do that, and we're going to be doing that in this video as well. Now, before we go any further, let me tell you a little bit more about who Gabby Petito was. Gabrielle Venora Petito was born on the 19th of March 1999 to parents Nicole and Joe. She was born and raised in New York, and her parents split when she was very young, but they remained amicable and both found new partners who Gabby grew very strong bonds with as well. Gabby was actually the oldest of 6 children across both of their parents' relationship, and she was very much a free spirit and a creative person. She was artistic and spontaneous, and she worked really hard to be able to do the things that she enjoyed. She attended the Baypont Blue High School in Long Island, and this is where she met another student named Brian Laundrie, someone who she never dated during school but did keep in contact with afterwards. She worked multiple waitress jobs, she worked in a pharmacy, and her most recent job before the road trip that we will go on to speak about was in Taco Bell. Basically, if Gabby wanted something, she didn't hope or rely on others. She worked hard to get out there and get it for herself. Now, when Gabby turned 20, she actually started to go into a proper relationship with Brian Laundrie. Now, some might say that this was a very young relationship, that they were both sort of super juvenile at this point, but you were in a relationship at this point, weren't you?
I was, but I do think at the same time, they did move at a very fast speed in comparison to what I think is normal. And what I mean by that is these two were living with each other within a matter of months, weren't they? And they had moved in together. It basically became very serious very quickly. Basically, what we're trying to say is these two were inseparable. And yeah, it was 9 months actually until they started living together. Now, something that I found out, which may be true, but the Netflix documentary potentially left out, is multiple sources claiming that Brian actually lived at the same home as Gabby, her mother, and her mother's partner. But what we do know is that Brian made a fairly good impression on Gabby's parents at first. They kind of described him as shy but polite, and noted that he was the sort of bloke that would look you in the eye and shake your hand, and that's something that as a parent would be comforting. And what we know for sure is that 9 months after they started dating, Gabby and Brian decided to move in with Brian's parents, but they actually lived in Florida, over 1,000 miles away. It's actually alleged that this was Brian's idea, and if it was, then this is a very common controlling behavior to try and separate you from your parents and the people that you're close with in your life. But being that they were still going through what some people would describe as a honeymoon period, Gabby potentially just didn't see this. And they had exciting things to come, as they both shared the interest of traveling, especially doing so within a camper van. And because of this, in late 2020, they bought their own camper van together, which they converted into a living space. And her art wasn't just on paper or the sheet. She wanted to translate it into digital content, buying equipment and starting a YouTube channel in which both her and Brian would vlog their travels. But before we get into the trip itself and the dark side of this couple's relationship, let's just fill you in on who Brian Laundrie himself is.
Brian Laundrie was born on November 18th, 1997 to parents Christopher and Roberta. Brian was actually the baby of the family. He actually just had one sister who was actually 10 years older than himself. Like Gabby, he was also very artistic, but the difference between them was that he was very much introverted, he was a little bit awkward, and actually did also struggle with anxiety. Other students mentioned the fact that during school he looked about 10 years older than everyone else, and people actually used to tease him that he looked like an undercover police officer, which is not the best look really for a 16-year-old student in high school. He was also into survival stuff. He loved camping, he loved the outdoors, and he spent a lot of time in the outdoors as well. And many observers actually said that once him and Gabby grew close, he became incredibly protective.
He did grow incredibly protective, but in my opinion did it in a very wimpy and bitchy sort of way, to be honest with you. He was manipulating her from an emotional standpoint. You look at text messages that were sent between the two. He mentioned so many times how he's just been crying his eyes out and stuff like this. Now listen, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a man telling a woman that he's been crying, but at the same time, with the context of what we're going to bring you in a moment, you look at these messages and you realize that there's a very, very disturbing trend going on.
It's
here.
a classic manipulative behavior kind of relationship right now, right? Someone will do something incredibly awful, so much so that you're almost running away, you're almost leaving the person, and then they'll bring you back with sort of really nice messages and words of affirmation constantly. So much so, mate, I don't know if you remember this, but they actually said that he would give her gifts constantly. He would always try and do very sentimental things, like always trying to bring her flowers or other presents, and he would always sort of rescue things from the brink. But you could see the manipulation was starting very early.
Do you know what's funny about that, what you just said? Yeah, those sort of PDAs, I call them, yeah, public displays of affection. I would personally say that the majority of the time I found out that those public displays of affection are usually in the more unhappy relationships, rather than the ones that don't really feel a need to put on a show for everyone else. And I say put on a show because it is very, very contradicting how people saw their relationship to those that actually spent some time with them and how they would describe it. We had friends of Gabby's come forward and basically say, mate, like, I couldn't even meet up with Gabby without Brian either being constantly on her phone and constantly texting her for updates, or even creepier so, sometimes turning up and tagging along. We're not talking about couples, double dates and stuff like this. We're talking about when Gabby would go and meet a friend of hers and Brian would turn up and watch along. And do you know what that friend in particular would compare this experience to?
It was Rose, wasn't it? Rose was the friend's name that she was out there.
Yeah.
And basically she met this person because she didn't know anyone else in the area. They met on Bumble Friends.
Yep.
They'd go out for a day together and Brian would literally be sat there in his hammock reading a book, but not really engaging, but sort of just watching them. It was super weird. But yeah, no, I don't know what
she said. It was like parents watching over a kid on a play date, which again is really, really weird. And when we're speaking about stuff that's very, very weird, I think this is a perfect time to mention the family dynamic between Brian's family and Gabby Petito, because Gabby Petito did tell her friends the home life was difficult with Brian's family. She actually spoke to her mum not long after moving in, and she said that Roberta had made her feel very, very welcome. However, it really didn't take long for things to change, because Gabby actually told her friends that her living situation had become uncomfortable, especially with Roberta.
These legends make a beautiful alternative to conventional soft drinks and energy drinks as well. So yeah, we tried out Holy for the first time, and the best way to start off is with the starter set deluxe. And my favorites within that set are the iced teas. Effectively what you do is you get the shaker, you whack 500 milliliters of water in that, and then just add the sachet to it, and you get a wonderful alternative to soft drinks. And my favorite so far is the acai and hibiscus. This effectively is a little bit like, almost like a blackcurrant tasting drink. It tastes absolutely beautiful. And yeah, these teas are high in vitamin C, and they're also enriched with fiber and antioxidants. And guess what? They don't have any added sugar either. But Joey, I know that you're in need of some energy at the moment, aren't you? So you've actually been having the Holy Energy.
Very much so, yeah. Sleepless nights with the baby, so it's been a lifesaver for me, actually. They also have 21 calories per serving, so they're definitely diet friendly. And my favorite flavor so far is the apple alligator flavor. And in here, there's a special caffeine variant called New Caf, which releases energy over the course of 4 hours.
So yeah, trust us, Holy tastes absolutely amazing, and it isn't going to hurt your guts as much as a soft drink would do. So try it now for yourself, and you'll be in good company, because they've got over 4.6 on Trustpilot, and that's with over 100,000 reviews. Mad one. Just hit that link in the description. Use code JoeyJosh for 10% off, or you can use JoeyJosh5 and you'll actually get £5 off your first order as well. Remember, that just has to be over $14.99. Huge thanks to Holy for sponsoring this part of the video. We thank them so much for being partners of the Joey and Josh channel. Now let's get back into the video.
And although Gabby didn't really elaborate on that statement that she made, I think things will become a lot clearer to you as we get on with this one. And Gabby actually didn't have to put up with an uncomfortable home life for too long, because by the 2nd of July 2021, her and Brian were finally ready to set off on this van trip, something that they had been looking forward to for so long. And the content, the pictures that they were going to be able to get from this were going to be great for the two social media pages, for, in a roundabout way, kind of keeping up presentation, I would say. But if you were someone that was a fan of these two, or you were watching them, you were scrolling through, you might think at a glance that life was perfect. But one thing that I would hope people actually understand right now is social media is just a shop window. Yeah, you literally see what people want you to see and what they want to advertise from their life. And ultimately, we like the good parts. We don't like the bad parts. And as you get on with this story and start finding out more, you'll start to maybe compare the social media posts from these two to that of a shop window, showing the good and not the bad, because there definitely was some disturbing events that we're about to follow.
Right, before we go into analysing this CCTV footage, I just want to give you guys a bit of a trigger warning. Obviously, this person was a victim of domestic abuse. And again, so many of you will be dealing with this yourself in your own life or have friends that are dealing with it. So I just want to say there is a trigger warning for that.
Hi, I'd like to report a domestic dispute. Florida license plate, white van.
What were they doing?
We drove by and the gentleman was slapping the girl.
He was slapping her?
Yes, and they drove off.
What's going on? How come you're crying?
I'm sorry, we've just been fighting this morning.
Can I get you to step out of the vehicle for me, man?
Yeah.
Why don't you come over here? You want to tell me what's going on?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, some days I have really bad OCD. And I was just saying, I'm sorry if I'm in a bad mood. I've just been really stressed. I had so much work I was doing on my computer this morning. And he wouldn't let me in the car before. And then
Why wouldn't he let you in the car? Because of your OCD?
He told me I needed to calm down. But I'm perfectly calm. I'm calm all the time.
So, tell me what's going on.
She just gets worked up sometimes, and I try and really distance myself from her, so like I lock the car and I walk away from her.
You want to tell me about those scratches on your face?
She got me with her phone.
Can I see your hand? Oh, you got a mark right here.
Oh, that's from a wire.
That's from a wire?
Yeah.
What was it you were attempting to accomplish by slapping?
I was trying to get him to stop telling me something.
Well, it doesn't sound to me like she attempted to injure him. I've decided I am not going to cite you for domestic violence battery. Okay.
So what we've just seen there is the police intervening and pulling over both Brian and Gabby. And we actually had the prior knowledge to this, that it was off of the back of a call that was reported to the police where a man said that he saw a case of domestic violence. He actually described it being between a male and a female, and he said that it looked like he had seen the male slap the female around the face. However, you've just hit me with something that I didn't know at all in this case, and that was the possibility that maybe the officer that was actually dealing with this situation didn't have the correct information at the time. Am I right?
What I've heard from this case, and they've obviously spoken to the police and they have to defend themselves after the fact here, and they also spoke to the dispatcher. Very often what happens in these calls is that the dispatcher doesn't speak directly to the police officers at the scene. They never make that contact. But what they do is they say that there's domestic assault and it's in this location. And what the caller had done when they called the dispatcher is say, it's a white van with this registration plate. And then the police very quickly actually found that van, and the van was actually driving erratically. So there was even more reason why it was quite easily found by the police officers. Now, the police officers, as I say, didn't have the context. So they go to it just knowing that there's been a domestic assault, and they've got to piece together what actually happened.
And I actually think initially the way I interpreted the treatment of Gabby Petito probably changed from how I saw it by the end, because initially they get her out the car, they lower their voices straight away to try and not only instill a sense of calmness, but also to try and get some honesty out of her, to try and de-escalate the situation from the intensity that it had previously been at. And instantly, after speaking with Brian, you can see the way Brian is going with this. And in my opinion, he's playing the blame game here. He's telling them about her underlying medical issues. She's also got OCD. I've tried to walk away from her. There's a lot with Brian's body language and his words in their own that tell me that he is blaming Gabby for this incident. And also, it's at this time that the police see the scratches on Brian's face. They ask him how he got them. One bit of good policing that was done here was they also check his hands to make sure that, you know, he hasn't been hitting anyone, which wasn't actually apparently visible at the time. And the police seem quite happy and don't press on with Brian too much, do they? They do quite quickly center their focus on Gabby. Would I be right to say?
Yeah, they see Gabby as the primary aggressor from this point on, because they've seen the scratches on Brian's face, because he has said that he was hit over the face with a telephone and that Gabby was the one that did that. And so they immediately start going down domestic violence case, but more so against Brian than supporting Gabby.
Well, Gabby actually admits to hitting Brian, so I can completely understand why they did that. But at the same time as that, you do have to look at things and you have to ask the question, really, that if you're dealing with these situations, can you be doing so without being really qualified? And I know that that does cast the net very wide and it expects a lot more of us from the police, but there are certain situations here and certain ways that they dealt with situations that I just don't agree with. For example, she admits to hitting him, but says that she was trying to get him to leave her alone. So straight away there, my question would be, what was he doing? Was he hitting you, for example? And it's the moment when they actually ask her what she was trying to do, and she just falls silent and looks at them. That, for me, would be a huge red flag. And that, for me, would be a time when I would think, right, there is a lot more to this, and this isn't really something that can be dealt with at the roadside.
What we will also just say, right, is that very often in these domestic abuse cases, one of the people that was slighted, the person that's actually been harmed, often backs up the person that is causing the abuse because they are in an abusive relationship.
And this is what I mean when I say about the police being more qualified to deal with a situation. I understand that a police can't be a relationship expert, but I think that you can have enough about you to understand that very rarely in cases of domestic violence are you going to get a wall of truth as soon as you approach the person involved in it. Again, I'm not a police officer, I'm not a body language expert, I'm not an expert in human behavior, but I personally do feel like I would have been able to see that in that moment, I was talking to a woman in distress. And I do think that the police didn't initially see that. One thing they never asked her, Josh, was, do you feel safe right now?
Yeah, 100%.
And had they have asked her that question, I think that a lot of things may have been avoidable going forward. And it's kind of mad that they're leaning towards the fact of her boyfriend being the aggressor when, as I say, I didn't know that the dispatcher and the officer at question had disputed this, but at the time we were led to believe that the reason they had pulled over that van was for a case of domestic violence where a man had been reported as hitting a woman. And not only that, this is the bit that makes it really, really hard to get your head around, because we have just watched that piece of CCTV footage. We watched the dash cam and the police body cams. And from that, I wasn't able to make this judgment. But many people have argued that the injuries sustained to Gabby Petito were very much visible during that police stop. Did you know this?
Yes, I did. And there's a picture that we'll show on screen right now that shows the damage that was due to Gabby Petito's face. It looks like a handprint, a hand mark directly onto her face, which would corroborate the fact that she was slapped. Now, this photo has been found after the fact to be from that day. So again, they can prove that this was her at the scene of that crime. And what we don't get to see through grainy CCTV CCTV footage is how bad that actually was, but the officers on the scene would be very clearly able to see that. So for me, that's a failure on their part to see quite obvious damage to her. They point it out. I don't know if you remember this. They point it out on the CCTV. They say, you've got a mark on your face and you've got a mark on your arm. But there's something about it that doesn't quite compute in the head that she has been struck and injured.
And we only realised this when we started piecing the case together, and we then looked into lawsuits that we'll speak about that happened after. But it was actually legally proven that when that that when that police stop occurred, Gabby Petito did have these injuries.
Yep, but before we go into any more detail around how this situation actually started, why don't I rewind time and go back to why they started the road trip and when this actually was. So in July 2021, the couple started their journey together, and they actually started from Blue Point in New York, and they actually took that converted white camper van to various different locations, starting in Kansas, going to Colorado, then they go to Utah's Zion National Park, and they also then go to Utah Mystic Hot Springs in Monroe as well. And really the first point that we see sort of coverage and footage from this trip was on July 29th, when Gabby actually starts shooting her first ever YouTube video. And this is where we see the scene, I don't know if you remember this, Joey, where they were in the salt flats. She was sort of like starting to get the camera out. And you can imagine when someone is first creating YouTube videos, much like when we first started creating YouTube videos, they're a little bit uncomfortable on camera. They don't quite know their way around it. And so she's trying to figure out how to create a vlog. She gets her drone out. She's doing all of the things that you would do if you're trying to make a sort of a van live YouTube series, but she's doing it from the position of being a relative novice, like getting used to things. And then on July 30th, they go to a place called Canyonland National Park. And then there's not really very much footage or Instagram photos that are from this point. I don't know if you know this, but there's actually an interactive map. I will link it down below in the description that details all of her Instagram posts and that sort of thing. So you can follow the journey yourself that we're describing. But there's actually a 12-day hiatus where there's no content being uploaded at all. And that actually takes us all the way up to August the 12th, which is where we do get another bit of Instagram footage. There's some photos of Gabby in this beautiful national park. And again, she's looking incredibly happy. She looks very normal in these scenes. And obviously, social media, again, could be a complete different world than what reality is like. And I think that's quite obvious in this case. But the photos look beautiful and it looks like they're very much happy together. But as I say, August 12th was also the day that they were stopped in MOAB, which was the place where we saw the CCTV footage from the police. The next day, on August the 13th, Brian actually posts his last photo onto Instagram. And this is a bit of a weird one as well, mate. I don't know if you've heard about this. He actually put a caption up saying that humans are primates, great apes, in fact. Very weird.
I don't really understand that.
It's just weird, isn't it? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So the next point of the story is on August the 19th, 2021, Gabby actually uploads her first YouTube video. And this is the compilation of all of the footage that she's gathered so far and sort of shows the start of their journey together. And this video has now got millions and millions of views. Have you heard about this?
Yeah,
like how many views
the YouTube channel itself is actually still up. Their travel channel.
On August the 25th, 2021, Gabby actually posts her last public photo onto Instagram, and this is showing her smiling, and it's in a place called Ogden in Utah. Also on this day, Gabby speaks to her mother Nicole, and they actually speak verbally on the phone. I think it's also a FaceTime as well, and she says that they're near a place called Grand Teton National Park in Jackson, Wyoming. And on the 27th of August, Gabby's mum actually receives a very strange text message where Gabby says, "Can you help Stan?" Now, Stan was her grandfather, and she would never, ever call her grandfather by his first name. Obviously, when you're talking about your own family, you would call him granddad, grandfather, grandpop, whatever you want to call him, right? So this immediately raised suspicions. It just didn't feel right.
Yeah, and even including the somewhat suspicious message, that would be the last time that Gabby's parents would hear from her, all the way up to September the 11th, when they finally decide to report their daughter, Gabby Petito, as missing. And this came off the back of days of trying to get into contact with their daughter, ringing both their daughter's friends and other family members to check if she had checked in. And most importantly, For me, this came after days of being completely blanked and hung out to dry by the family of Brian Laundrie. The family of Brian Laundrie had been in contact with the parents of Gabby Petito prior to this, but after that day when that text message was sent, all of Gabby Petito's friends and family were ignored by the family of Brian Laundrie. So the police actually travelled to the home of Brian's family, and they are met at the door by parents Christopher and Roberta Laundrie. And for those of you who maybe watched the Netflix documentary, I'm assuming this was the moment when not only did you realise that something was up, but you also realised that this story may have more characters involved than we initially realised. Because these fuckers not only refused to talk to the police, they refused to cooperate in any sort of way. And when the police turn up at your door and you have already lawyered up, which is exactly what they did, handing them over a written letter from their attorney, I'm going to be massively suspicious of you. And they actually said to the police on their doorstep that Brian was inside the house, but Gabby wasn't. And the problem with this is both Brian and Gabby's van was on the driveway at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And now the police did some digging at this point, and they found out that the van was actually registered directly to Gabby and not to Brian in any way. So they actually towed the van straight away. And they were quite clear, weren't they, the police, where they were saying, be very careful, don't touch anything inside. So the police at this point already knew that something was up. And so much so that there had been a detective assigned to the case, and they were taking it incredibly seriously, the police at this point.
Yeah, I do kind of feel at that moment in time, right, like there was definitely enough there to go in and arrest Brian or arrest his family. And obviously that didn't happen. Now in America, they say, you know, we need probable cause. But I would say at that time, you've got a woman that has been reported as missing from her family. You've got the man who she was supposed to be with in possession of the vehicle that is registered to her. Regardless of what we think about how these guys bought it and whether they put the money together, the truth is that this vehicle was in Gabby's name. And even if a police officer didn't feel like Brian had done it or like someone was guilty here, I think that that is the point in the case where they make the first big mistake by not arresting Brian Laundrie.
So what the police do next, and they actually do something, which is good to know, is they actually start surveilling the house, the Laundrie family home. Did you know that they actually did this via the consent of a neighbour? They actually put up CCTV cameras in the neighbour's garden, covert CCTV cameras, because they weren't able to do it on their property. But the police, not only were they watching via CCTV, they were also stationed constantly from outside and around the home, watching all the time. Now, there's also context to remember here. There's also a mob outside the home as well. So there's a lot of people watching the house at all times.
And there is a problem here, because when you say about surveilling, right, what I feel surveillance is you are on someone's tail 24/7. The best ones won't know, you know, you won't know that that person is watching you. But this isn't the case here, because on September the 13th, they actually see Brian leave the house in his Ford Mustang. And it's not until 2 days later that they see what they believe is Brian return to the house on September the 15th. And straight away, that tells me that they didn't follow Brian during those 2 days. So to even call this surveillance, I think is using the term loosely.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. And what did they say next? Did they say that they know where he was at this point? Or did they just say, we have no idea, he's gone?
They said, all I'm going to say is that we know where Brian Laundrie is at. It turns out that they didn't know where Brian Laundrie was at all, because the figure that they saw returning that car 2 days after it left turned out to apparently be Roberta Laundrie, Brian's mother.
They do look quite similar, Brian and Roberta. You have to say.
They look fuck all alike. That is awful policing, in my opinion.
How the hell could you get these two confused? It just doesn't make any sense.
It is ridiculous. And it's actually on the next day, September the 17th, that they hear from Roberta herself. And do you know what she's calling them to do?
Is she reporting a missing person?
She's reporting a missing fucking person.
So wait a second, it's Gabby. She's reporting Gabby missing.
She is reporting her son, Brian Laundrie, who's apparently inside the house, as missing. And they actually claim that they have not seen Brian since September the 13th, meaning that the police timeline is now completely off. And therefore, the search for Brian begins.
Information had hit the media a week or so earlier regarding Gabby's disappearance, and therefore, police had already started to receive so many different tip-offs at this point. Some of the most useful parts of information came from other van travelers and even people who had picked up hitchhikers. Now, it had emerged that a couple of different people had picked up Brian while he was hitchhiking alone, without Gabby even there. One of those people is a woman that drops him at the gate of Spread Creek and would later go on to report that sighting to the police. A couple who had also been documenting their travels on YouTube actually found some footage that showed the Petito van parked up, and this gave police a real indication on what area might be the best to start searching. Law enforcement, including the FBI, National Park Service, and local officials, conducted an extensive level of ground surveys in the Spread Creek dispersed camping area, an undeveloped and rugged site on the eastern boundary of the Grand Teton National Park. But on September the 19th, 2021, the worst news imaginable comes out. Basically, after all of the searching, police managed to find Gabby Petito's remains. And the initial signs on how Gabby died were not clear. Basically, there was no obvious reason that she might have passed away, but she was soon sent for an autopsy, and the autopsy proved that she was struck and hit over the head, so suffered blunt force trauma, and also that she was strangled. And these findings were made public on September the 21st, which means we now have a victim of homicide and they have been found. The chief suspect in that is still missing, and a set of parents who at best are not cooperating with police. During this time, they tracked the phones of bank accounts, realizing that Gabby had been transferring money to Brian during that time that both were said to be missing, and Gabby was known to have passed away. Which meant on September the 23rd, 2021, an official FBI arrest warrant goes out for Brian Laundrie, and that was for the use of the debit card and not because he was actually implicated in the crime of murder itself. It is a very weird part of this case, mate, that the FBI only were able to actually arrest him for this, what feels quite a trivial element of the case, bearing in mind everything else that is going on right now.
Yeah, and police had already been searching for Brian Laundrie. They'd actually been searching for him since his parents had reported him missing, and his parents had said that he was heading to a place called Mayakanachi Creek Environmental Park in Florida, and that they actually went there to look for him when the car that he had left in was found. So police close in on that area, but despite looking for Brian all the way from October the 7th, they do not find anything until October the 20th, where his body is found in an area that was said to have previously been flooded, hence why they may have not found it first time around. Now, the strange thing about this date is this was the first time that Brian's parents had both actively gone in together and joined in with the search. The search, by the way, that police experts had actually been going through for, as I say, nearly 2 weeks before this. And once Brian's parents rock up, they changed the search area, directing police to a new area that they believe that they should search based on his interests. And within about an hour, they actually find items that lead to the discovery of Brian's body. His body was identified through dental records, obviously badly decomposing because of the area that it had been left in, and it was later revealed that Brian had actually died from a single gunshot wound to the head. A notebook is found next to Brian's body in which he confesses to the murder of Gabby Petito, but instead of admitting to it as and how it happened, this cowardly lying piece of shit decides to continue lying from beyond the grave. And he actually writes in it, telling the police that his murder of his girlfriend, Gabby Petito, was actually an act of innocence. He says that Gabby had fallen and seriously hurting herself so badly that she was gasping in pain and asking for Brian to end her life. So out of mercy, he decided to kill her. Now, Josh, I'd love to ask you the question, do you believe Brian's turn of events there?
I don't believe Brian's turn of events for a second. He was quite obviously, at this point, trying to concoct a story to make himself look like the victim and look like someone that was not involved in any way, in any serious way. But his story makes absolutely no sense. And more than anything, Joey, the autopsy of Gabby proved that the story was absolute bullshit.
But this wouldn't be the first nor the last time that either Brian or his family were caught lying by authorities, because by the time that Brian's remains and the note had been found, police already knew how Gabby Petito had died. And I'm not being funny, mate. If this was an act of mercy, blunt trauma and strangulation is not the way you would put someone out of their misery, so to speak, is it?
No, it just doesn't make any sense. There's nothing logical about his story in any way.
And there's no evidence for the fall. There's no evidence for the fall at all. She obviously underwent an autopsy and nothing on there said that she had fallen, broken any bones, things like that. And if Brian's parents found that abandoned Ford Mustang with a parking ticket on it apparently on September the 14th, why did they wait until the 17th to report their son missing? So they get back, they put the vehicle back in the garage, and then they just wait 2 days before actually ringing police. 4 days, by the way, after they last saw him. Police searched that area for basically weeks with nothing. Yet when Brian's mum and dad rock up to the area, they redirect the police, and within about an hour, items are found leading to a discovery. It's actually discovered that during the period in which Brian returned and Gabby was reported as missing, Brian and his family went on a family trip. Could this have possibly been a final goodbye? And if Brian's version of events were true and Gabby did injure herself, why did he not try harder to get her to a hospital? I've had a little look, and there is a hospital approximately a half-hour's drive from where they were. And if this death was such an unfortunate accident, why did he lie to try and cover it up? Why did he go to such lengths of deception? Why did he send texts impersonating Gabby? And why did he steal money from her?
So it doesn't take a genius to say that you obviously think Brian's involved here. It's quite obvious at this point. But you're also insinuating that the parents are implicated at this point, aren't you?
I mean, mate, if you're not already concerned knowing that the parents harboured a murderer and protected him at all costs from the police and were no help in the search for their missing daughter-to-be, it would seem, then you're probably never going to suspect them. And although this is only suspicion, it's alleged, it's just my opinion, then what about this? Brian's parents cut all contact from Gabby's family before her murder or disappearance had even been confirmed.
So much so, they actually blocked the number of Gabby's mum. So she couldn't actually even contact Roberta. So it actually had to be the father that was sending messages and chasing them up.
Maybe that's not enough for you. Yeah. Maybe you feel that you need more. Well, how about the handwritten letter that was found with Brian's possessions that was wrote to him from his mother, Roberta? This letter began with "burn after reading." Never a good sign. It contained a lot of shit in there that was emotional and not really relevant and no one's got time to hear of. But she also quotes, "If you need to dispose of a body, I will show up with a shovel and garbage bags. And if you get sent to jail, I will bake a cake with a file in it." Now, there has since been a civil case between the two families, which we will get onto. However, in that court case, Brian's mother said that she wrote that note to Brian before the two had even set off on their travels. However, one thing that the Netflix documentary never included was the fact that after that police stop that we analysed earlier, Brian flew home to see his family.
Now, I've heard that this flight home was so that Brian could move some stuff from a storage unit that he had. And basically, the lease was expired and he had to move it out of there. But you just don't believe that, do you?
Not really. No, I believe that Brian was a complete mummy's boy. I believe that he probably got a lift from his mum when he got to the airport and things like that. And therefore, I believe that Brian Laundrie would have 100% told his mum how he was feeling.
And also, the context here is that he also had a series of very long phone calls on the day in which it is suspected that Gabby was murdered. So there's also a lot of things that just don't quite add up here. They're very significant long phone calls. There's a trip home. There's a camping trip, by the way, just super weird. It just doesn't add up.
And I personally believe that in telling his mother, Brian's parents, whether they meant to or not, would have encouraged him in some kind of way to do what he needed to do. I believe that they would have said things to him like, you know, we're your parents and we'll love you no matter what. And I'm not clutching at straws here, am I? We have got a handwritten letter basically saying that. I personally believe that Brian told his parents exactly what had happened, or a version of events which ultimately culminated in Gabby's death. And I believe that he told them that around the 1st of September when he flew home. That is exactly why I believe that they lawyered up on September the 2nd, long before they had even gotten a knock from the police. If you had no idea of anything, then why on earth would you lawyer up 10 days before Gabby's reported missing? I then believe that on the 6th or the 7th, they actually went on this family trip with Brian's sister, her partner, and their kids. However, it's very, very hard to give an indication on whether or not Brian's sister would have known. And I do base that on prior interviews that she's done and the fact that she has now herself cut off ties with the family. However, I do think that Brian's sister doubted her parents and possibly had a strong indication as to what had gone on, especially with the fact that family members had even been trying to reach out to her, and she would have gone on that trip and discovered, what way or another, that Gabby was not there. And maybe after that discovery, that's when she grew suspicious. But I think Roberta would have had suspicions about her son long before. I also think that she knew exactly where Brian was going on the 13th and therefore knew where to find his car. And to be completely honest with you, mate, until we see some CCTV or surveillance footage of Brian leaving that house alone, I find it hard to believe that Roberta maybe wasn't even in that car that night when it left the house. So do I think that Brian's parents could have prevented the murder? I'm not sure, right? I'm not sure. But I understand that if there is a doubt, then you probably have to say no. Brian probably didn't go home and say, look, I've already planned it out. I'm going to kill her. But would I suspect that he alluded towards feeling violent towards her, maybe even confessed to being violent towards her? I would very much suspect that he did tell his parents that. I actually think that is when the letter was given to Brian by his mother. And to be honest, that gives him positive reinforcement that no matter what you do, your mum will always love you. So to be clear, I'm not saying that Brian Laundrie's parents could have stopped Gabby Petito's murder. I'm also not saying they couldn't have, by the way. But what I am saying is that they definitely knew what had gone on there and they covered up for their son.
I think more than anything, looking back and reviewing this case and looking at what the parents did, it raises a lot of questions about how far you would go for your potential son or daughter or anyone in your family that has dealt with a crime like this. And I think it's a hypothetical question that a lot of people really struggle with. Like, how much would you actually defend your own flesh and blood knowing that they'd done something really bad? I know plenty of parents that would back up and defend their children for a lot of things. I don't think they would do this when they know this bad. And I think when you're asking the questions, would you do that? Like, how would you feel if you were in this situation? Like, would you back up your kids?
And it's not only the fact that they backed him up though, mate. It's the fact that they did everything they could. And let's not even say, oh, allegedly. No, this is fact. You did everything you could so that your son would not face justice. If you want to prove me wrong, Tell me why you gave a written letter over to the police officer and said, we are not willing to talk to our attorney, rather than letting your son talk to the police in a moment that could have been crucial to help find Gabby alive. Well, your answer might be, well, Gabby's not alive. My answer to that would be, how do you fucking know that Gabby's not alive? The parents, in my opinion, knew exactly what had gone on here.
And it wasn't just you that thought that. Gabby's parents also felt the same. And this is where we get into the court case itself. And also there were some civil suits as well that I'll discuss in this as well. So there wasn't actually a court case to speak of. Obviously, Brian had self-deleted at this point. So there wasn't, therefore, the need to go to a formal trial, which meant on January the 21st, 2022, the FBI officially closed their investigation, saying that there was no one else implicated in Gabby Petito's death, and that Brian was solely responsible.
Sorry, mate, I've got to jump in here. You said there's no one else, right? There's no reason to go to the court because there's no one else involved. Is there not such thing as assisting an offender?
I think there's 100% and a case that should have been.
So why is there not a court case against the parents?
Offender. I think the parents have been incredibly clever with the way that they've dealt with this, and I mean that in the worst way possible, by the way, that they've lent on lawyers and they've always spoken through lawyers and never said anything to the police. So they've never implicated themselves, and gathering the evidence has meant they've found it quite difficult, the FBI.
You're always going to start on the best foot when you've had a lot more preparation time for a situation than anyone else involved has.
Let's be honest.
Let that be known.
Let's be honest. The evidence for me is police knock on your door and you say, we're really worried about something here. We're really worried about your son and his potential partner being missing. No one's seen them. We're all really worried about them. And then they go, yeah, we're not going to let you in though. And if you want to speak to us, you can speak through our lawyer. It's like, that's evidence for me in itself.
And again, it's very easy to look at behavior and body language and stuff like that after you know exactly what has occurred, and then to analyze it and then to judge it. I understand that. But at the same time, are you telling me that the people that we can see on screen right now don't have a clue of what sort of man, and I use that word very, very loosely, their son has become? They knew, in my opinion.
And also, it wasn't just them, by the way. The detectives on the phone call at the police stop actually said, this is feeling really suspicious. This is feeling really weird. There's something that doesn't add up here. So even at that point, without all of the context we know about finding Gabby later on, the police knew that something was wrong. So despite there not being a, I suppose, legal and sort of homicide case that comes off the back of this, there are 3 different civil cases that were launched at this point. The first is that Gabby's parents actually filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Brian Laundrie's estate. So basically his family and all of the income that he actually had. The suit actually alleged that Brian intentionally killed Gabby Petito. And on November the 17th, 2022, a Florida judge actually granted this suit and said that it had passed through and awarded Gabby Petito's family $3 million from Brian Laundrie's estate. Gabby Petito's family then set up the Gabby Petito Foundation, and they donated, or said that they were going to donate, all of the revenue that was generated from this lawsuit to protect the victims of domestic violence.
Clue me up, mate, because I don't really understand these sort of things as well as potentially you do. How can you be guilty enough that you need to pay a $3 million settlement, but you're not guilty enough that you can be convicted in court of assisting an offender that you knew had murdered someone?
I think the burden of proof on a homicide case is far greater than a civil case. And also civil cases are prosecuted in different ways, i.e. without jury. Do you know what I mean? It's
so what about when you agree a settlement? Would you agree with me in terms of that is a clear showing there then of your guilt?
They didn't agree the settlement. They were ordered to pay it. So that's the difference. In this particular suit, they were ordered to pay it. Now, also, by the way, $3 million is what they were ordered to pay. People think that they're never going to get the $3 million. They're never going to actually pay it, effectively.
So have they not paid that $3 million?
No, they haven't.
Well, what have they done? Because I'm not being funny. I would not be able to show my face on this planet again if I was those parents.
I
I
don't
think
think
most people would be encouraging those parents to go and take a trip down to that same woods that Brian was found in, if I'm being honest with you.
I don't think it's clear at the moment, or public knowledge, how much money that they've actually submitted for this suit. But also, I think, going on your point right there, I don't think the public will ever allow them to forget what they have done. What we haven't really gone into is the level of press attention that this actually got. And there were hundreds of people outside their residence for weeks on end actually putting pressure on the parents to actually tell the police what had happened. And I don't think that's going to let up anytime soon. I think they'll be on constant pressure for the rest of their lives. They're certainly not going to have an easy life. So we then get to the next civil case. So Gabby's parents, Joseph Petito and Nicole Schmidt, actually filed another civil lawsuit against Brian's parents this time, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie, alleging intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit was resolved on February the 21st, 2024. It took so long to actually get resolved. And the families actually agreed a confidential agreement, a confidential settlement. The Petito's lawyer noted that the resolution was reluctantly agreed upon to avoid further legal expenses and prolonged personal conflict. You can understand Gabby's family didn't want to continue drawing this out and spending so much more on legal fees. And the fact is they had to actually agree to a settlement. And as a result, we'll never truly know what was agreed upon in terms of financial recompense, but also what Brian's parents actually agreed to. And the third and final civil lawsuit was actually against the MOAB police department, the people that actually stopped the couple at the time and had that domestic violence call. Basically, the family of Gabby Petito sought to bring back $50 million as a result of their negligence in terms of dealing with this case. And unfortunately, a judge actually threw that lawsuit out, and therefore that was never upheld, and the police never were given any sort of responsibility to that as a result. But there is one last legal framework that did come into law itself. It was the Gabby Petito Act. That was a new law that was implemented in Florida, which changes how law enforcement have to look after and deal with domestic violence cases. This means they have to ask 12 questions when they're going through these sort of interview style cases that they're talking to the victims of domestic assault. And that is meant to be proper training so that people can actually deal with these cases effectively and actually protect the victims, which is the ultimate thing that didn't happen here. The victim wasn't protected in the right way.
Yeah, and the other thing, just to finish on, that didn't happen and didn't end in the right way was obviously, in our opinion, the treatment and the punishment that never really happened to Brian Laundrie's parents. And one thing that we had to look up there was whether or not they did try and move away. You would assume that they would, and we had read reports that they had kept a massively low profile. But do you know Brian's parents actually still live in that same home? Meaning, if you're a neighbour of theirs, if you're someone that suspected them, clearly neighbours did. Hence why one allowed the surveillance footage to be set up in their back garden. You've got to cross paths with those people still. You still have to live across the road knowing that those people that did what they did and covered up for Brian's crimes are not only there, but that house now serves as a permanent reminder. This was actually so much so the case that residents were actually saying, these lot need to move. We're not happy with them being here. And they actually put a for sale sign up. So in 2021, we believed that they were going to be moving house. However, the deception that they showed in this case is clearly something that comes quite easy to them. Because what if I told you, Josh, that house was never up for sale?
What was that
Not
about?
legally.
Yeah,
not legally. There's a for sale sign put up in the front garden. I believe that was another one of their sort of clever plans that they had hatched to maybe get the attention away and to maybe stop people putting that pressure on them to move. Because we looked and that house was never registered for sale. Also, local estate agents said that house had never been put on the market. And if it had, that they would have either been notified about it or potentially would have taken it on themselves.
So horrible. And I have to say, this was a truly horrific case. And quite honestly, it was quite difficult to watch all of the research that we watched on this, but also to talk about it. I just want to give a huge amount of credit in all of the stuff that I have watched and listened to on this case about how well Gabby's family spoke and dealt with this through various moments of intense trauma. and pain. And they spoke, as I said, so well about their daughter, and they went through all of those events. And our thoughts and prayers go out to them, all of Gabby's friends, and most importantly, in her memory as well. A truly horrific case. And again, if you've been affected by this in any way, we will be leaving resources below in the description. We just want to say thank you so much for watching this video. And if you do want to watch another one similar to this case, why don't you check out the Chris Watts video on screen now. Below that will be a video that YouTube recommends. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.